I will read from the book Magic Words. Here I am. The simplest answer would seem to be to ask the job candidate whether they have had ever been fired or the realtor if the neighborhood has any downsides. But it turns out that how we ask such sensitive questions has a big impact has a big impact on whether we actually uncover the truth. To examine the right way to ask sensitive questions, some researchers invited a couple hundred people to negotiate the sale of a used iPod. The only issue was two instances when the iPod had completely frozen. Fixing that had involved resetting all the factory defaults, which had deleted all the music that was stored on the device. A couple hours has been wasted each time that had happened, and there was no telling if and when it might happen again. Each participant engaged in a brief only negotiation with a potential buyer. In addition to mentioning some general things, the potential buyers asked a question. For some participants, the question was a general one. What can you tell me about the iPod? For others, a more direct question was asked, specifically whether the iPod had had any issues in the past. The iPod doesn't have any problems, does it? Not surprisingly, sellers tended to focus on the positives. They talked about how much memory the iPod had, how it was in great shape, and how it even came with a protective case. As in most strategic information exchanges, they emphasized the aspects that benefited them. In fact, when asked the general question, oh, what can you tell me about it? Only 8% of sellers volunteered that there had been any issues with the iPod freezing in the past. Even though the same thing might happen again in the future, almost no one volunteered the negative information because they knew it would hurt how much they would get for the device. Just asking questions by itself clearly was not enough. So, did directly asking about the problem help? Kind of. If buyers directly asked about any potential issues, the iPod doesn't have any problems, does it? Some sellers were relatively forthcoming. Around 60% of them faced up and noted that the iPod has the history of crashing. But while asking directly encouraged some sellers to divulge the negative information, 4 out of 10 still avoided answering it to create a more positive impression, which means buyers ended up overpaying for the device almost 40% of the time. This is a bit disconnecting, concerning. After all, even when asked which seemed like the most direct question possible, the sellers still didn't provide a straight answer. Maybe some people are just dishonest. Whatever questions they were asked, they would find a way to wrestle out of answering it. Liars are liars and there is nothing to be done. But while that may be true, another problem was the language itself. Because while a question like it doesn't have any problems, does it? Asks about the presence of problems, it also makes an implicit assumption that there are not any. As the research on speed dating and asking for advice suggests, questions shape how we are perceived. But they not only shape how smart or likable we seem, they shape the inferences others make about our knowledge and intentions. Asking something like, what can you tell me about the iPod makes it easy for respondents to focus on the positive. After all, it was not a direct question about problems, so there is no reason to bring them up. Even a more direct question, it doesn't have any problems, does it? Suggests that the buyer doesn't have any real information about potential problems or reason to believe that there might be any. So, for the seller, omitting those issues still feels safe. Sure, it's dishonest, but if there are incentives to be overly positive and little chance of getting caught, the downside seems low. So, are we just stuck with people lying to us 40% of the time? Thank you. That's it for the day.